Hi, everyone. So we are glad to be hosting you for this test fiesta, and hope you guys are learning and enjoying all the sessions. I am Chandini Chopra, and I will be your host for this session with my co-host Manoj, who will join shortly. Before we start the session, we would like to thank all our partners for supporting us and being part of this event. We encourage all of you to go and check out their booths from the launch if you wish to connect with them later. Unfortunately, our speaker, Isabel Evans, could not attend the session due to some medical reason. But the good news is she's been gracious enough to share a pre recorded session for us. So let me tell you a little bit more about Isabel Evans. After more than 30 years in IT quality and being a testing practitioner, Isabel Evans is now a part time postgraduate student at the University of Malta. Malta research focuses on human factors in test automation. Her interest in this topic arose from real life experiences as a test manager, quality manager, and test consultant. A popular speaker, a storyteller at software conferences worldwide, Isabel has chaired Eurostar 2019, HUTSEF 2018. She loves presenting tutorials and keynotes at conferences worldwide. Her session will cover findings from her research completed between 2017 and summer 2022 to give insight into who is testing, how they are testing, and their views about tools they're asked to use. Session will also cover why usability can be illusion, what it's like to be stuck in limbo, and mixture of frustration and pride felt by testers. So without any further delay, let's get started.
Good morning. My name's Isabel Evans. I'm recording this now because I'm supposed to be giving it live later today, but I can feel I'm starting to come down with a migraine. So I'm just doing this now in case I don't make it to the conference. So excuse this being a little bit ropey if it is what you're listening to. I'm going to be talking a little bit today about my research, which is in progress at the moment. I've been looking at the experiences of testers with the tool set they're using, and I'm going to share some of the findings so far. I'm midway through this. At the moment, I'm looking at who is doing testing and whether their tools help and support them. So I'm going to report back on some early results from a couple of years ago and the beginnings of the latest results, together with directions the data's taking me. This is very speculative. I'm still partway through doing the data analysis, and every time I do more analysis, I learn more, of course. But where I'm heading is a series of experiments to test my ideas and speculations. There's an article there that I wrote for Sticky Minds, which was a few weeks ago, which has got some more detail. And of course, these slides are available via the conference. So who am I? I've been around in the industry for a long, long time, as you can see from the dates on there. And I started by doing a computer science degree. And then in the 80s, I was doing testing and test management and quality management. And then I continued as a practitioner, but was a contractor and consultant and a teacher of testing. And then from 2017 onwards, I've been doing this research via University of Malta. Expected completion date is 2025. Doing academic research is very painstaking and slow. But it's very well founded. So this is not about sort of quick results, it's about understanding. And then in terms of that journey from 2017 onwards, I had to learn how to research. I had to discover whether what I wanted to look at was worthwhile. So I had conversations with different people, did some interviews and some workshops, started a series of surveys. And then was doing data analysis and publishing academic papers and industry feedback on what I found. And those findings led me to formulate a new hypothesis. So what I discovered was what I'd originally thought was entirely wrong. Well, not entirely wrong, but it was the wrong direction. And so I've refocused, got a new hypothesis now, and I've done a new survey during 2021 and into 2022. And now I'm doing data analysis, and that's going to move me towards developing what I'm calling a design framework. So this is not an automation framework, it's a framework about how you go about designing tools. And I'll be doing case studies and trials of that with a view of writing up and completing in a couple of years' time. And I've published 3 papers so far: Stuck in Limbo with Magical Solutions, Scared, Frustrated and Quietly Proud, and Test Tools, An Illusion of Usability. Those are all academic papers. So I've had over 250 participants worldwide so far, with a good mix of age, gender and background. And this is a large sample size for the qualitative research methods I'm using. But I think it's important to realise that this is not just a few people I'm talking to. This is worldwide, it's different industries, it's a mix of people and their experiences. And I was collecting stories to understand people's characteristics and their experiences and their work styles. And I'm doing that in order to try and improve the way that tools support testers. So that, in summary, is what the research is about and its scope. And I'm not the only person looking at improving tool support for testing. So Richard Bradshaw, Mark Winteringham, James Bark are all examples of people who are looking at test automation, test tools in different ways. And I think all their work is valuable. And I think there's an overlap between our different efforts. That they're complementary rather than contradictory, I would say. So let's get a report back on some early results. So one of the things was people were experiencing a lot of challenges. Now, you don't need to read all of these quotes now straight away. They're in the article that I commented, and you can look at the slides afterwards. But people were experiencing problems and challenges. And they also thought certain things that are important. And the table at the top there gives the frequency that different main topics came up. Usability and quality and use of the tools was the most mentioned. And then other technical attributes like the maintainability of the tests, security came up a lot, performance, those sorts of things, reliability. A lot of management and organizational challenges. And there were 232 issues and challenges raised. So not all of those comments were negative. Some of them were positive, some of them were wish lists, so on and so forth. But a lot of people with issues and challenges. But what was really interesting with that early data was the level of emotion people were showing. And by the way, a lot of this was in anonymous surveys online. So it's not like I was asking for emotion, but that's what was coming out. And that caused me to stop and restart my analysis and ask other people to come and also analyse the data to make sure that I wasn't mistaken in what I'd seen. So strong emotions being shown about the tools and about the experiences of the tools. So that emotional response, you can see there's a spreadsheet where I was using colour coding to show which participants were showing emotion about in what questions. I wanted to see whether this was just 1 or 2 people or whether it was quite widespread, and it was quite widespread. And if you look at the questions, they're not questions that are asking about emotions. 35% showing reasonably strong emotions in their responses to non-emotional questions. So one of the things that made me think about is when we're talking about usability, what are we talking about? So this diagram was me thinking through what do we really mean by usability and how does it sit in with people's experiences. So on the left-hand side, you've got the user interface design, which is supported by interaction design, and that contributes towards usability, but it's not the whole of usability. Usability also means you're thinking about the goals and the context. And usability is one of the contributions towards quality in use, which includes things like flexibility and freedom for risk. And it's not just usability, that's also supported by your technical attributes that I mentioned before. And quality in use is a contributor into the overall user experience, which includes looking at trust and credibility and flow. And then user experience is a contributor to people's lived experience. So their emotional response to what's going on, what they're experiencing as a person, as a human being. And this was what was coming out in the data, that the tools and the experiences of attempting to implement tools was actually affecting people's lives quite profoundly sometimes. So just getting a good user interface isn't enough. There's a whole bunch of other things you have to think about in order that people's user experience and their lived experience is optimized, is supported. So there, UI not enough, quality in use, UX are contributing in. And I mentioned earlier, one of the papers was called The Illusion of Usability. It was noticeable that some of the comments I was getting about people's experiences of these tools was that it indicated that the tools designers were focusing on attractiveness rather than the usefulness of the tools. So superficially they look good, but actually they didn't deliver. Also, it became obvious that tools tended to focus only on one user group, only on one type of person doing testing, so that they perhaps weren't sufficiently flexible for all the people who were using them, or the learnability wasn't right for all the people who were using them. And this made me start thinking about there are different testers, are not just one group of people, perhaps. And then because the tools designers weren't always thinking about quality and use, maintainability, performance, and security came up over and over again as issues with those tools. And then finally, people change and grow and their requirements change and grow. And the analogy I've got there is, on the one hand, if you're at a concert grand in the Carnegie Hall and you've never played the piano before, you're just going to be lost and miserable. You have to learn to do that. It takes thousands of hours of practice to be that good. And it's going to be the same with some of the tools that we want to use as testers. There'll be people who are specialists in those, people who are experts, but they're not for everybody. But on the other hand, if you just give somebody a piano, where there's a roll that goes in and it plays one or two tunes, they're never going to learn to play the piano from that. They're just going to be able to play those roles that are already in there. And so some of the test tools were like that. They were very stuck in holding the people using them to one particular way of acting. So there's something there that I think if we understood better who was testing and what their needs were and what their change and growth needs are, we might design tools in a different way. And one of the things that came out is that the testing community is very diverse, very varied. Lots of different roles involve testing. So some people doing testing are primarily testers, but not everybody doing testing is primarily a tester. And all those people were having to use tools. And the types of activity apart from testing that people were doing were very diverse, from software development to project management and beyond. So different roles there in different domains, so wide range of domains. And it feels to me from the stories people were telling that actually those domains give you different requirements of tools. There is not one thing that fits one way of doing things. one set of tools which are right for all those different domains because of different needs, business needs, whether that's regulatory or safety, or indeed need for speed. Different domains have different requirements. And finally, it was really obvious from people's stories that the backgrounds for people coming into testing were very varied. Not everybody had got software engineering as a background. Not everybody had got the business domain as a background. There was a mix there. So again, depending on people's backgrounds before they entered testing, they would have different knowledge, different experiences, and therefore different needs in terms of the tools themselves, the learnability of the tools, the support for their growth as they came through the testing role. Okay, so because of that, I went to particularly look at who is testing and how they're testing to try and understand what the groups were amongst the testing community, to see if I could understand whether that would lead to better knowledge of what types of tools might be suitable for different subgroups within the testing community. So all the previous information kind of goes into a funnel, comes down, new survey with different and more focused questions. And that's the one where I'm still analysing the data and writing up. But there's some interesting indicators coming out of it. So again, variety of job titles, and I asked people specifically about their job titles and whether their job titles matched with what they actually did. And sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. So some people, 8, 9, 10, felt that their job title reflected their role really well, and other people, 2, 3, 5, 6, it was less certain. And there were some interesting comments about, am I an engineer or not an engineer? What does QA actually mean? Is a QA the same as a tester? I'm called senior, but I'm not senior. Or I'm actually working as a leader, but I'm not called a leader. And so you've got some interesting things there where there's a mismatch between the expectation of what people are doing and their job title and what's in their job spec. And interestingly, I've seen online recently some discussions similarly with people saying, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what my title means. I'm not sure what the career progression is. So there's uncertainty there. So I'm asking myself some questions now about whether those job titles actually describe what people do, and do actually those different roles need different tools, different interfaces, or different ways to interrogate the data that comes out of testing. Those are ongoing questions. I don't have the answers to those, but I think they're interesting questions to ask ourselves. And then I asked people about their training. So you've got a group of people who'd come in through named courses, named syllabi, particular ways of doing things. There was another group of people that primarily talked about their teacher, the person who had taught them. And then another group who had just done workshops, self-taught, experienced, not had any training at all. And I thought that was quite interesting because I'm out of scope for what I'm doing, but I think it's an interesting question. You've got those different routes, the autodidacts, the disciples, the people following syllabi. Do these contribute to professionalism or improve testing or improve quality? Do you get a different sort of attitude to testing, or do you take in a different attitude to testing? What happens on those 3 different routes? Do you get a different outcome or not? Don't know. Interesting question though. But in scope question, do the training routes affect people's attitude to use of or needs from the tools to support their work? Again, that's a current question I'm asking myself. I don't have an answer to it, but I think it's an interesting question. I asked people about their academic qualifications from people who'd left after high school, through starting a degree but not finishing it, getting a degree, a master's, postgraduate work. Some people didn't respond at all. And what's interesting here is that I've marked the person who did, the people who didn't respond, sorry, is the age group there against the qualifications, because it looks like people between 35 and 64 were coming through with lower levels of qualifications than either the 65s and overs or the under 35s. So I don't know what that means, whether that's just the chance of who answered the questionnaire, or whether there's a link between academic qualification, how people test. Is it actually now the case that at least a bachelor's is now a normal entry point? Does that matter? Is that what employers are looking for? Is that a good thing or not? But certainly from my point of view for this research, is there a link between any sort of academic qualification, how people test, and does that affect how they use the tools? For example, if somebody's done postgraduate work, you'd expect them to have a good sound grounding in critical thinking that you might not get if you've left education at an earlier stage, and particularly if you've left education at an earlier stage some decades ago. So it's kind of like interesting. Again, I don't know, but it's an interesting question. And then I asked people about their hobbies, specific versus general. I asked them about their hobbies, and then I categorized the hobbies. So are they arts or STEM, individual or team, very specific or very general, passive or active, indoor or outdoor? And I think the interesting things here are, it looked like the people answering in the survey, this group of testers, were more focused on arts than STEM, and were more interested in active rather than passive. So by that I mean very active versus passive. So passive is listening to music. More active is singing in a choir. Most active, some people were talking about composing music. So actually doing and making as opposed to listening and watching. And I think it's interesting that we've got active artsy people, but also interesting, look at the mix there. Really across that diagram, there's just a mix, indoor and outdoor, individual and team, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm starting to wonder whether hobbies indicate preferences for problem-solving methods and tools. So if somebody talks about building their own car, or liking to tinker and tailor things under the hood of the car, or just want to get in the car and drive, does that indicate something about the way that they solve problems in work, and perhaps their attitude to tools? Do they want to actually build their own tool, or just want to pick up a tool and use it? A tolerance for level of tinkering and tailoring that's required. So what direction am I going in now? And remember, this is going into speculation now. So I moved away from the data, I'm asking questions, and now I'm speculating, and then I'll do some experiments. So one of the things is that the person who uses the tool has got a context. They're within a context, obviously. And if the person who designs the tool and builds it is also the person who uses it, then that context is identical. So that's fine, that should work. But the further away you get from the same context, the less understanding of each other you're going to do. So the toolsmiths, the people who design and build the tools, may not have a good understanding of the people who are going to use the tool and the context they're going to use it in. Oh, this is a common problem in IT, of course, anyway, but interesting, even within our own industry, we don't necessarily have the same context and the same understanding of things and the same needs. So what I'm trying to do is use the research data to provide a framework for tools designers that's people-driven and evidence-based, that talks about the characteristics of testers and their approaches and of tools, and therefore helps the tools designers to use the framework as a guide to help them understand their users. So the context, the tools designers support their testers better within a context. So using the framework, they can understand a specific set of testers within their context, their preferred approach, and therefore the tools they require. That's kind of where I'm aiming. And I've started putting together a model. So this is like, it's not how it's going to be delivered. This is me thinking. We've got the tester and their organizational context. And of course, they have a context outside work as well. So they overlap rather than being right inside. But then within that organizational context, they'll have some goals and they'll have some activities. And the context and the goals and the activities should tell us what tools that they need. And I'm starting to break those down. So in terms of the person, what can we know about their capability and learning preferences, and what do we know about their work style preferences? And I'm not going to go through those in detail, but you can see I'm thinking about things like communication styles and team shapes and problem solving styles and all sorts of things. These could all be completely wrong. So my experiments are about, are these the right things to be looking at, and if so, how? But it's the type of thing I'm thinking about at the moment as candidates for understanding the person, the tester. And then similarly for the context, there's the organizational culture and the level of technical maturity. And again, what contributes to the culture and the organizational maturity? And I'm thinking about that in different ways. How does the organization define quality? Whereabouts in the technology stack is the organization? What's the domain? What's the level of technical maturity? And so on and so forth. Leadership styles. Again, this could be completely wrong, but it's kind of how I'm thinking at the moment. So to give an example, if we look at communication styles, so one way of looking at communication styles in work is DISC. DISC puts people into not just 4 boxes, but there's multiple axes to this. So this is just very, very simplified. But for example, if you've got somebody who's fast-paced and task-oriented, then they may just be looking for a dashboard. They just want the highlights. And if you've got somebody who's fast-paced and people-oriented, they might be very happy working on Slack and discussing things on Slack. But somebody who's people-oriented and slower-paced might prefer a whiteboard and Post-its. And somebody who's task-oriented and slower-paced might prefer a spreadsheet. And what's interesting is when I look at the data from the survey, you can see when you ask people how they prefer doing things, you can see those all coming up. And you can start to match it with other things that people have said about how they like to do things. And so you might have a tool that's fundamentally a sort of a set of spreadsheets, and that might be good for one set of people, but it just might not be appropriate for other people. So one of the examples is there's a particular tool that's very popular, and one of the respondents said to me, didn't say to me, in their survey answer was saying, you know, this tool doesn't allow me to work in a pair or in an ensemble way, because pieces of work have to be assigned to a single individual, and I actually want to assign it to a group, and that group's fluid. So, you know, the tool therefore is working on the idea that people work as individuals, and in that culture with that group, no, people work as a team. So that type of thing might be quite interesting to look at. Again, this is very much speculative. So the next thing is a series of experiments to test my ideas and speculations. So I'm now going down from the initial broad workshops and surveys and interviews into the focus study survey I've just talked about. I'm doing some meta studies, which is picking up information that other people have gathered across the industry and reanalyzing that. And I'm actually now going to focus right in on bug management, defect management as an activity and the tools to support that. And the reason I'm doing that is I think it's very central to everything we do in testing. I mean, it's not the only reason we do testing at all, but always in testing we're raising defects and then we have to manage them. And it affects a wide range of people, not just people with the tester hat on, but people in other roles. And it's used in different ways to look at progress broadly, to look at risk broadly, to look at specific defects, to do prioritization, all sorts of different ways that those bug management tools get used, and the bug management activity is done by different people for different reasons. So it's kind of quite an interesting, in a way, very niche and focused, but also quite sort of broad in its impact. And I'm going to do some case studies. So what I'm going to do is work with different companies in different domains and also do some expert reviews. And I'm going to do case studies and workshops where I'm going to take my ideas for the framework and look at what people in those companies are doing with the bug management activity and with their tools, and see whether the framework can predict any of the issues and challenges they're having. Because that's what you'd want it to be able to do. You'd want it to be able to say, like, in this context, people are going to need this type of thing, and if you give them that type of thing, it's not going to work. So I'm kind of testing my ideas out and doing experiments, and that's what the next couple of years are going to hold. And all of this is going to be iterative. So I've got this framework, this tool design model, which is sitting there in the middle and which I've started synthesizing and then discussing with people. All the time I'm going to be trying it out and refining it and looking for more data. So what I end up with might be completely different to what I've just shown you as my first thoughts. It very much, this research is an iterative process. So in summary, I've got evidence from a wide range of participants. I've done some papers about that, particularly discussing that people are experiencing emotions that affect their lived experience and that people are experiencing tools that don't meet their needs. Going against some of the cliches about testers I've heard from managers in the past. Testers are creative, active, interested in learning, but there's no clear single type of person doing testing. Managers I've worked with sometimes in the past have had very strong views about testers are this type of person working in this type of way. And it's not the case. People work in context with many roles, many backgrounds, and many valuable skills. And what I'm going to do now is focus in on bug management as a specific example of an activity with a set of tools in specific contexts and try and prototype a model for tool design. So thank you for listening. I'm sorry I've been a bit, but I am feeling actually increasingly awful. So I'll say goodbye now and hope that this was useful and interesting. Thanks very much.
So yeah, that was interesting, isn't it, guys? So what an insightful session, and definitely broadens our scope of thinking. Certain things, we've never thought about. Those kind of questions came up. I saw some, questions kicking in on the Q&A. We're definitely going to collect them and publish a blog, as Manoj mentioned in his chat as well. And thank you for being a great audience. And our sessions will be hosted back on the YouTube channel. So stay tuned and enjoy rest of your sessions. Thanks, guys. Bye for now.